Today I would like to talk about one of my favorite books and also all similar books that I have in here as well. It's the Lexicon of the Mystical Arts. I've got it in Hungarian, but actually it's a German book that is translated, and I just really wanted to point out the fact that it has the most authentic and beautiful imprints, medieval engravings and so on. They're truly impressive, and I've always appreciated encyclopedias and books on the matter of mythology or magic, either way, that have authentic illustrations instead of some cheesy like Pinterest, internet culture, Google search, whatever results. So the illustrations of this encyclopedia are quality, but also the entries are qualities as well. You can learn about very much lesser known terms such as the demonic hand, the significance of the planets, various seals, and also medieval cosmological concepts such as how shooting stars were supposed to be the sky impregnating the earth. Also, you can read about original sources from astrologers, court wizards and whatnot that you can barely understand because they actually quoted from the original Latin. The outside of it is nice and yellow. It is a very bold color choice considering that it's literally from 1973. So this is a retro publication, but the aesthetics of it is undebatable. So encyclopedias are actually very useful when it comes to studying about mythology, magic, folklore, even contemporary culture references and whatnot. I feel like just staying on the subject and looking for my other encyclopedias that if you are interested in the subject you should definitely read as well. So two encyclopedias that stand out for me straight away, they're also called lexicons in other languages, is Encyclopedia of Psychology and the Story of Philosophy, which is also sort of like a timeline historical format, but everything is order in it. So even if you're not interested in rituals and ceremonies, if you read about philosophy and psychology, it will greatly help you sort of see through people and tendencies in your environment. It will also make you go very sour about life because many of its illusions will be suddenly not so compelling as they were before. The Story of Philosophy is more modern, as you can tell by the font and the sterility, the cleanliness. It's not as like warm and welcoming like the first yellow encyclopedia was. Needless to say, its layout and illustrations are absolutely quality. Again, original sources, no half amateur, melodramatic, sentimental oil paintings about Romani women reading cards or anything like that. It's actually beautiful original recreations of medieval works. Now this is slightly more academical, that's why it's not in English. I really struggle to find commercially available books that are also academically high-end. This is the Encyclopedia of Psychology, and this is a proper encyclopedia, unlike the philosophy one where I got a little confused. This one has all terms, all philias, all complexes, all fixations, all fetishes in one nice, orderly, alphabetical collection with amazing case studies and experiments. I literally read this from, well, almost literally read this from the beginning to the end when I was 14 years old, and it was extremely useful in, again, learning about by what mechanisms adults operate by, because you think there is an overarching narrative that is so obvious, everyone is normal, so on, and then it turns out that people constantly compensate. And they're constantly answering their inner self instead of, for example, talking to you. So although it's not as aesthetically pleasing, I must admit, academically it's so high quality that it will be worth a read through when it comes to academic and intellectual self-development. If the idea of an encyclopedia is a little bit boring, like it's not as satisfying to read it from beginning to the end, then this is a treat, Alchemy and Mysticism. It's actually sold at Waterstones, published by Taschen in English. It is extremely visual, it's essentially a photo album for hermetic works, and it is a true pleasure to flip through it and read about the meanings of these illustrations. So one thing about alchemy, that it was a predecessor of chemistry in antique times and in medieval times and even later. The issue is that it's over-mystified, so it's very easy to misunderstand it. And you just look at these mystical-looking illustrations, and really, you're just intimidated by them. You must assume that, there must be credibility to it. But if you purchase books like these, you will see that sometimes, unfortunately, there was more superstition, and there was more artistry, and there was more philosophy behind this school of thought than there was actual science. It's not as intimidating alchemy as it looks. Also, it hasn't got as much credibility as it may look like. As far as I know, contemporary alchemists are extremely confident in their worldview, but there's not much substance. They literally consume random substances, claiming that spiritually it elevates them, but at the end of the day, it's just almost like another form of ceremonial magic. When it comes to a more readable format, I have The Book of English Magic by Phil Carr Gom and Richard Haygate, and also Witchcraft, The Secret History by Michael Streeter. Now, if you look at the books, I mean, both are lovely, but this coral looking one immediately stands out. Why? Because it's contemporary, it's aesthetic, it's gorgeously curated. Whoever was the graphic designer hired for this, they made an excellent job with aligning all these antique illustrations with these very minimalistic shapes that are branded beautifully. You're literally not going to find a single color in this book that is a single shade that is not white, black, or this beautiful coral. I'm not sure if this is the graveyard font, but it very much looks like the graveyard sans font. I'm yet to see how valid it is academically. So far it looks like it takes itself very seriously with very exact figures, so it is a gorgeous purchase if you want to study witchcraft and rituals, but also you don't want to be too dreamy about it, or you don't want bad quality information. On the other hand, I a little bit neglected this one, but of course the Book of English Magic, it is I've read this from front to back. It is very strong on citations and it was extremely informative. There are personal essays from actual contemporary practitioners. The only issue with it, of course, is that it's very dense. I barely remember anything from it. I have a general vibe of what the tradition is in England now, which is amazing, but it was so dense that you can barely keep up intellectually. There were so many key figures in contemporary and not so recent spirituality. The front illustrations are very satisfying, they really are. The inside is a little bit underwhelming, but if you prefer like a drier, more intellectual style where everything is very serious and colorless, it can actually make you feel very nostalgic if you're open for it. I'm going to move on and shift around a little bit with subjects that could also aid you in learning about, you know, the human condition, traditions, mythology, the collective conscious, if you will. So one thing that you will immediately have to learn about and study, because it helps you understand humanity so much better, is mythology. Mythology is essentially the active dreaming of humanity. It is literally humanity free associating and coming up with meaningful and not so much meaningful associations. It is actually very useful to dive into, because if you watch movies in a certain way, if you listen to music in a certain way, and if you read folk tales and mythical legends in a certain way, that will help you make conclusions about, okay, so what was relevant in that era when that was made? What was the political situation? What were the priorities? What were the gender roles? What were people worried about? What was the unknown considered as? For example, in medieval times it was the ocean. In contemporary times it is more like space. So it's always very exciting. If you decide to research mythology, I must say, don't bother with books that are low quality when it comes to illustrations. There are beautiful books out there that really put an extra effort into curating beautiful images. Now, these books, one is about monsters by Christopher Dell, and one is about dragons by Carl Schuker. They both look rather childish at first glance, and then they reveal themselves to be anthropologically very well curated. All the illustrations are very high-end, almost like an art history book, and there is zero childishness in it. The only childish aspects in these two books are the fact that they are written in a very enjoyable way, almost like folk tales are, so they can be read as a story even. I definitely recommend both of them because they have much more substance to them than you may assume just by looking at the subject matter. In fact, sticking with the high academia encyclopedia matters, there is the Encyclopedia of Mythology by Imra Silayji. That is a Hungarian publication. It may look very dry, but it's extremely knowledgeable about mythological matters. And on that note, an absolute classic of any sort of seeker of mythology or cross-cultural studies is the Book of Imaginary Beings by George Louis Borges. I cannot emphasize what a classic this is, and it's been written by a highly renowned author and poet. As you can tell, the actual book itself is very tasteful. Even under the cover, it's extremely tasteful. It features the description of a handful mythological beings, cross-cultural, of course, all sorts of creatures, and what makes it stand out that these are not just like cosmopolitan commerce magazine entries. These are actual quotes from archaic literature, which gives it even more authenticity, and the quotes are in fact very, in a way, dramatic and inspiring, uplifting. If you really want to dive into the classics that have been affecting our culture through history, Aesop's fairy tales, any publication must have. Soon You might get bored of the stories because they are slightly repetitive, but all of them are very carefully crafted metaphors, so at least make sure that you read a few and then you will get the gist of it. You will see what's been inspiring folktales for a very long time now. The Bible is an extremely heavy writing, especially because of how much it seemingly divided humanity and made everyone debate it from different angles. If you're interested in Christian mythology, I would suggest maybe don't just immediately talk with representatives of the religion because they will be very opinionated and vague. Try to find an academic study of it first and read that. I have not read this, by the way. It's just an impulse purchase of mine. But it is very promising in terms of tastefulness if you look at the cover. And it's super voluminous as well, which gives me the hope that it's indeed a very objective analysis of the work. Now, speaking of voluminous works, any book of Yuval Noah Harari, an Israeli author, historian, well-renowned historian, is a must. It's a huge undertaking to read his books, but the fact that he's a historian and also an extremely, so to say, progressive homosexual man, it makes his remarks super relevant in contemporary times. His works touch on history, the human nature, tendencies in history, the corruption in various governments, transhumanism, technology merging with humans, various studies on animals. I would say these two, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century and Homo Deus, and also Sapiens is one that I don't have. I would go as far as saying those books about everything, because they touch on everything, but in a very meaningful, very articulate way. Of course, if you want to stick with the subject of more objective matters such as science, I would recommend The Vital Question by Nick Lane. It discovers the nature of life, what life is, but in a very objective way from a scientific perspective. So you're not going to find any dodgy philosophy or religious narrative that sort of contaminates our relationship with reality. It is purely textual, by the way, with a few academic illustrations. The cover is gorgeous enough. You should not buy this book for, obviously, because you're seeking an aesthetic treat. This is more of an intellectual treat. And it is very similar to Yuval Noah Harari's works, of course. If you ever want to understand humanity, even slightly, and what's going down around you, what's going down in the world, you will not be able to avoid, you should not avoid studying art history either, because that, if nothing else, that is definitely the collective conscious. What directions art and creativity taking through history. Another Taschen publication, this one is about Hieronymus Bosch, but there's also one about surrealism. Extremely well curated pictures with very gorgeous, very well executed explanations. They are not overly subjective whatsoever. They are not blue sky thinking. They are not random. They are not what was the author meaning to express with the blue curtains. There is no such thing. It is actually very culturally significant what it has to say regarding the times. And of course, sticking with art, if you would like to understand more about composition and also sort of the philosophical and narrative meanings behind shapes, Sacred Geometry will be amazing in understanding the so-called sacred geometry, but according to my opinion, there is nothing sacred about it. It's more like just the golden ratio and everything that there was discovered about geometric laws and the laws of beauty. Again, not so subjective, very scientific, and if not too objective, then still very theory driven, so it's very respectable nevertheless. Do not neglect folktales, by the way. Stick with your childhood books. They have more mystical lessons in it than you would think, more occult lessons than you would think. And if you can, do get a beautiful publication of a well-known fairy tale such as The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen, but illustrated by Vladislav Yarko. The illustrator either does pencil drawings or paintings, but they are so well detailed, beautiful. There's so much effort put into them and so much expertise. It's so realistic that it is almost moving. It is moving, by the way. So we touched on rituals and comparative religion, cross-cultural comparisons. They're all meet somewhere. They're all about the same thing. In regards to, for example, Hermeticism or occultism, I would very much recommend what is considered to be a classic in Hungary. That is The Magic of Everyday Life by Mária Szepes. It is a lifestyle book, but it basically tells you how to think. It recommends you to follow its method, and I must put that in brackets because it's not really a method, it's a philosophy. But if you embrace the philosophy, or if you cherry pick parts that you like, it will really change your perspective on how much you dictate your own destiny. And the book is about destiny overall. No illustrations, however, but it is a retro classic. My biggest surprise on the matter was Wizardology, which is a children's book. But what is outrageous is that not only it's interactive, it has foldable parts and moving parts. Actually, the magical systems presented in it are legit. They are historical. It all takes inspiration from medieval cosmology and nothing else much. But the culture background of what's being mentioned in it is actually legitimate and well researched. I'm not saying that it works, it really doesn't, but it's literally what people used to believe in medieval times. And there are some very heartwarming things such as the phoenix feather that is hidden in it, and also the fairy flag. So these are my recommendations in the subject of ritualistic magic and mythology. It all started, this little tour, with the Lexicon of Magical Arts, or however you would like to translate it. These are truly aesthetic, inspiring works that make you grow hopeful about this notion that there still might be meaning in this world, hidden, just very well hidden.